So first up we have Ryan Hosken, and just a reminder, as we're going through, all of the questions can be asked through the app. It gives people a chance to, write stuff down, and you can thumbs up stuff to bump it up, and gives like a nice record and makes the whole thing a little bit smoother once I jump up here to start asking the questions at the end. So today Ryan's going to be talking about the reality of data responsibility, how to secure and protect your data on Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Salesforce, Google, Dropbox, and I believe all the rest. And I can only assume the reality is a good thing. Yeah, so everyone please give a round of applause for Ryan coming up here to take a look.
Thank you. Oh, look at me, I'm first up. It's a bit nerve-wracking. I remember I was here last year, and I was Friday towards the end, so it's a bit, a little bit nerve. Can you guys hear me okay? Yep. Yeah, it's a little bit, nerve-wracking and up on this stage as well. So thanks everyone for coming in and listening to my talk. Hopefully you guys are all having a great morning, and hopefully the last couple of days have all been good as well. As said, my name is Ryan Hosken. I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant with OpenText Cybersecurity. So OpenText Cybersecurity is a business unit within a larger OpenText organisation. So we work with a lot of managed service providers, small, medium business, to provide a layered, resilient approach to prevent data breaches and help them recover if something does go wrong. So I'll cover a couple of different topics here today. So on the agenda, as you can see on the screen, I'm just going to start off with some market trends, what we're seeing, some drivers that we see. And also I'll talk a little bit about the threat landscape, data loss scenarios. So what are some ways where people or businesses can actually lose their data from cloud-based platforms. We'll also delve a bit into why protect SaaS platforms, look at a bit of a history of backup and cloud backup benefits. So I'm assuming that everyone sort of talks about cloud backup, started from sort of on-prem, moved to cloud, some challenges that came with that. We'll touch on adherence to compliance as well, so how you can be compliant when you're protecting your data that's living in cloud platforms. We'll also touch a little bit on business continuity, so business continuity and some security best practices to reduce the chance that you or your company or someone that you know's company will suffer a data breach. And last but not least, I'll touch on where we fit as an organisation to fit in to solve the challenge and how we can help organisations out there. So this slide's probably not going to be a surprise to anybody. Everyone probably already knows this. The workplace has changed, been driven by the pandemic, COVID-19, the global shift to remote work. So ages ago, 5-10 years ago, the general, stereotype of going into work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in the corporate office has all shifted. So businesses have had to adapt to that. We all know that. And because of that, the workplace is now existing outside of the corporate perimeter. So no longer do you go into the corporate office, you're protected by all the infrastructure that your company provides to keep you secure when you're inside the organisation. So that workforce is now spread out. So there's some limitations and vulnerabilities to that, because obviously I'm assuming that not everyone's router network at home is going to be as secure as what you'd find in a corporate environment, unless you're really into that and you want to sort of build it out as secure as you can. So because of this, because the workforce now exists outside the corporate perimeter and it is spread out, we see an increased use of SaaS-based collaboration tools. So we now see big drivers on Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, Dropbox, Salesforce, all cloud-based SaaS platforms, because in a workforce that exists outside the corporate perimeter, you need to be able to still collaborate and work with people. So there's technologies that, Microsoft, Google, using some examples here, that are built to make sure that you can be productive with your colleagues. So as part of moving on from that a little bit, how we've seen the workplace change, we'll touch on some market trends and needs that we do see. So a trend, increasing use of SaaS business applications. So we touched on this in the previous slide. It's a transition to cloud, so some businesses adapt faster than others, moving to cloud. Things like, for example, legacy on-premise applications, custom-built design may be a little bit harder to sort of move it into cloud, but we are seeing a trend, that transition into a cloud-based workforce and cloud-based environment. We jump into a need for businesses today, and this probably resonates with everybody here. A secured backup product, fast recovery options. So to be able to protect your data that you write into a cloud-based platform, the collaboration tool. The last one here is a little bit different to the other needs and the trend that I've just mentioned, the lack of in-house IT experts. So we have seen, like over the last couple of years, a shortage, IT shortage, workforce, qualified persons, IT hiring. We've seen that it's been hard to sort of find people, skilled people to do the jobs that you need them to do. So what we see as a need, potentially as well, or more specifically, if there's businesses that are small, maybe sole traders, 1, 2, 3-man operations, you want something that's simple and easy to use. You don't want to spend all your time, all your free time on just managing platforms. You want to spend on more productive things. At the end of the day, time is money. You want something that's really easy to use. So moving on from some of the needs and trends that we're seeing, I've sort of picked out 3 main market drivers that our team has seen in the last 6 months or so. So the big one on the left there being cyber insurance. So cyber insurance is, there's probably two points I'll make here. So the first one is the mandation of data protection for cloud-based platforms like 365 and Google Workspace. So it's now included as part of these cyber insurance policies. To be compliant, you must back up that data, or insurance policy is not going to pay anything if you suffer a data breach. The second point to note is not only do you need to actually back up that SaaS application data to protect it, policies are becoming more and more expensive because the threat landscape is getting more severe, more complex, and it's a lot more frequent as well. We're seeing the frequency and severity go up astronomically. The second driver I just want to touch on is compliance and legislation. So compliance surrounding data retention is increasing. I think I was speaking to somebody the other day, I can't remember who it was, but they were saying data retention in specifically the education vertical, they're talking about bringing that up to 100 years. So 100 years is a long time. So with that comes its own challenges that you need to be able to store 100 years worth of education data securely and make sure that it's easily accessible in case you do need to retrieve it for any reason. We're also seeing the Australian Essential 8 gaining more traction from different industries given the recent breaches. So everyone's well aware of some big well-known breaches that have happened over the last 6 to 12 months. And those are only the ones that we know about. There's probably plenty more in the small scale that don't make it to the news. People are getting breached every day. So in terms of staying compliant, the Essential 8 is one of those things, really good gold standard framework to target and measure your cyber resilience posture against. The third point I'll just touch on here is the accelerated threat landscape. Now, I mentioned this briefly a little bit, but that landscape is driving business continuity discussions. So because of the severity of the threats that are out there, the general thought process is, do I have enough security in place? And 2, if something does compromise my systems, my cloud platforms, do I have the ability to actually restore and get back to where I was without it impacting revenue and also reputation? So the rough sort of median average cost, so OpenText Cybersecurity publishes a threat report every year. This threat report that we published this year has the median cost of ransomware payments at the end of 22 at around $200,000 as median. The reason I touched on the accelerated threat landscape as a market driver is because the severity, as you can see from this picture on the screen here, ever since people start talking about viruses or being hacked and things like that, it started all the way from Trojans on floppy disks, where if you reboot the computer after the 95th time, it'll just lock up and you can't use it. So it's moved from that element to a point where you've got phishing continues to be the main driver, which you've probably heard over the last couple of days. Phishing is very, very prevalent. But things like email spam, botnets, vulnerabilities in critical networks, and also like spear phishing and social engineering remains to be probably one of the biggest drivers. And then we also see some gangs like DarkSide tackling and taking down supply chains. So the Colonial Pipeline in the US is one example of that. So there's a lot more urgency and things are getting more and more complex. I wanted to, now, before I sort of talk about this a little bit, this was actually supposed to be animated as a website that was embedded, but for some reason it's very temperamental as to whether it works or not. But basically what I'm showing here is our Zix threat map. So Zix is a company, part of OpenText Cybersecurity. What this is showing is the email threat vector. So we have a real-time threat map, so we can see phishing attacks, malware, and spam on that email vector going across different continents and popping up all over. So I didn't want to spend a huge amount of time on this slide. I just wanted to illustrate that everyone talks about phishing. It's become one of those things you might be a bit desensitized to it, but it's important to not forget the scale of and frequency of how much this happens. Okay, so we'll switch gears a little bit and we'll look at some common data loss scenarios here. So you guys can all read faster than I can actually talk, so I'm not going to sort of read everything out here. But we've got sort of 4 main categories of common data loss scenarios that we see. So accidental, malicious, synchronization, and then ransomware breach, which does tie into malicious a little bit. So if we look at accidental, so accidental is very prevalent with collaboration-based platforms. You look at OneDrive as an example. You look at SharePoint. So if users are unintentionally saving things and overriding things that they shouldn't be, you're accidentally deleting data. So it's not something you're doing on purpose, but it is something to be aware of. So accidental data loss can occur. There's also malicious. So malicious can also be broken up into internal and external, because if we look at the first example, a disgruntled employee, businesses might have an employee that's a bit disgruntled, thinking about leaving, maybe he's not getting paid attention to, things like that. They might decide to leave. The problem with this is this employee has probably got certain amount of access to systems. So it's a lot easier to do, I'm not telling you how to do this, but it's a lot easier to do damage from the inside when you're already in there versus trying to get in. So disgruntled employees, it's one of those things that it's slept on a little bit, but it is something to be mindful of. Then we've also got your traditional virus ransomware as an external malicious threat. Synchronization. So the example that I'm going to use here is my parents are very technologically illiterate, to say the least. So with synchronization, one point I want to make here, how data loss can occur. We all remember when iTunes was very big. Like iTunes came out, everyone used iTunes, plugged their phone into iTunes. Then all of a sudden, mum plugs the phone into iTunes, oh, my photos are gone. So synchronization, the point I'm trying to make here is that you can, it ties into accidental a little bit, but you can unintentionally synchronize things that you've got between your laptop and your phone, any third-party apps. You download a third-party app onto your phone, it's asking for permissions to photos. You think, well, why do you need that? You don't need that, but it's a third-party app. I'll accept it. Then all of a sudden, photos can synchronize and go missing. So things can happen. So just something to be aware of. Ransomware and breach, I've already covered, ties into malicious a little bit, but what we do see, and I'll tie this to the little blurb on the left-hand side of the screen. So IBM published the cost of a data breach study in 2022. On average, 277 days takes companies to identify and also contain threats inside the systems. So more often than not, when an external malicious actor has got access to a system, generally they will just sit there and not do anything for a good couple of months because they want to try and figure out who's got the right credentials, where's the least path of resistance, and how can I do the most damage with the least amount of effort. So for comparison, 2019 was 206. It has gone up to 277. That being said, that number is coming down again because companies are actually investing and looking at things like managed detection response, outsourced SOC. So you actually got proactive threat hunting is more of a thing now. So it's less likely, but it still does happen. That number is coming down, which is a good sign for everybody. So ransomware is not going away, unfortunately, but the trend of living off the land is it's reduced amount of time. So I'm not going to bore you guys with statistics, but I just want to sort of highlight here that SaaS data protection is a growing challenge. We look at 81% companies have lost some sort of SaaS data. It could be on OneDrive, SharePoint, Dropbox, whatever it may be. So companies have lost data. The really interesting thing I want to hone in on here is the middle statistic. So 35% rely solely on the SaaS vendor to protect their data. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, if I was putting data in a cloud environment, it wouldn't be, I mean, maybe it's being that I work in this industry, but I personally would want to put my own countermeasures in place to make sure nothing happens to it. So 35%, that's quite a big number, and I'm sort of spending a little bit of time on this because it does translate into the next slide in terms of the point I'm trying to make here. But the main thing to be aware of is that SaaS providers are not responsible for protecting your data and keeping it safe. That's the customer's responsibility. About a quarter say malicious deletion is the top cause. Malicious deletion could be internal, could be external, could be a combination of both. Still a relatively high number based on the common data loss scenarios that we looked at on the previous slide. So I'll move into probably the I guess you call it the meat and potatoes of why we're here and why I'm sort of talking about this today. So we're looking at why backup SaaS data. Might be a little bit hard to see. I probably should have put it up a little bit more, but the point I'm making here is this is the example of Microsoft's shared responsibility model, and it's very consistent with all the other cloud providers. So if we look at the top, we'll take Microsoft as an example. Their responsibility is maintaining the data center, the network, virtualization, and protection. So their responsibility is keeping the infrastructure active, operational. If there is a breach to any sort of Microsoft data center, it's their responsibility to obviously go in and do a root cause analysis as to what's happened. So their main objective is to maintain uptime. If you have a look at the bottom blue part, and again, apologies, might be a little bit small, hard to see. If we look at your responsibility, first point, customer data and information, access management, who can access it? If we jump across to the bottom right-hand corner, we've got data backup, retention, and archive. So that's all the customer's responsibility. There's also quotes on the right-hand side of the screen from leading cloud providers illustrating that, long story short, it's not our problem. You need to find a way to back up your data. We're not responsible for it. So SaaS providers are not responsible for backing up customer data. It's the customer's ownership. Sure, there's some fail-safe methods in there, recycle bin, versioning to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, if you want something immutable to comply with retention, maybe you need to hold data for X number of years, you need a solution to do that. So we'll just take a bit of a segue here. We'll look at a brief history of backup, so where we've come from. So we've gone from tape backup, on-premise backing up to tapes. As the tapes obviously get full, replace them, and then it's the responsibility of the customer to store those and make sure that they can be retrieved if they do need to be retrieved. We then move across to disk backup. So we've gone from utilising tape to backing up to network-attached storage, hard drives, so backing up to another storage component. Both of these are still on-premise, so we're still protecting our data. We're keeping it on-premise. So it could be an off-site location, could be off-site backup as well. But as we're sort of moving from left to right here, you can see that things are becoming less about the actual customer needing to maintain like uptime, maintenance, things like that. So it's it's moving towards SaaS, subscription-based. The third example we've got here, cloud backup, backing up on-premise to cloud. There were some challenges when this was, for a lot of businesses, when it was first introduced, because like I don't have the bandwidth to be able to upload all my stuff to cloud, which is it's a perfectly valid concern. So the actual problems that cloud-to-cloud backup replaces is that's no longer a concern. Bandwidth's not a concern, don't need to maintain anything. It's just a direct connection to a cloud DC. Providing it's secure, encrypted, there's less that the customer needs to do, and there's less stress on the customer's environment. So how do we address data and SaaS vulnerabilities? So first of all and I'm sort of skipping ahead here. I've got a little bit of a slide to protect it from the actual preventative side. But if we have a look at how we address the vulnerabilities, we want a solution, or we want something to be able to back up that data that we create. It's ours, it's personal, we want to make sure we're protecting it. So ideally what we want here is something that's, one, automated. We're going back to the simple, easy to manage, saving time. automated. We want something that can restore to a point in time. So if you don't have a point in time restore option, it's not really of any value because you can't pick an exact point where you want to restore to. And you also want the ability to export and take your data with you. At the end of the day, it's yours. Why should the solution that you're using to protect it have ownership of it and keep it? So it's yours. You should be able to take it with you. So you want something that's automated. You want something that has the ability to export. Also unlimited or a long period of retention. So you can comply with any sort of industry-specific regulations or geographical specific regulations of how long you need to keep that data for. So that's how we address it. And some of the benefits of utilising a cloud-to-cloud backup tool to protect your data, to improve productivity. So it's fast recovery. You don't need to download recovery images or anything like that. It's a direct restore back into a SaaS tenant. So there's no real infrastructure pain or time. It's quick and it's easy. The ability to restore point in time. So we touched on that on the previous slide. We want the ability to go back to a specific point in time. If, for example, your environment is hit with a breach, files are encrypted or deleted, exfiltrated, whatever it may be, you want the ability to go back to a certain point in time and recover that, not from if the last backup was done, it's encrypted, your backup's encrypted, you want to be able to go back to a certain point in time. You also want to maintain regulatory compliance. So you want to comply with any sort of cyber insurance policies that you've got and make sure you're protecting your data. So there's no problems if you do need to lodge a claim for any reason. What a cloud backup solution allows you to do in order to protect your environment is it drives internal efficiency. So you ideally want something that can cover, if you're a customer that uses multiple cloud platforms, you want something that's easy to use. You want something all in one place, easy to restore. So this is an example of what it could look like for a customer that maybe is backing up multiple platforms. So you can see, for example, Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Workspace, everything all being protected. So you want something really easy. You can log in and recover from any of those platforms if you do need to. So I'll talk about compliance a little bit, and I've picked out three specific points here to adhere to compliance. So data retention. So we've covered this already. In terms of data retention, if it's industry specific, you might need to keep data for 1, 7, 10, 100 years if that's the case. You want to be able to comply and retain that data. Second point here I'll make is BYO storage. So with the rise in protecting SaaS-based applications using a cloud-to-cloud protection strategy, you might be in a situation where you have either clients or part of your business might reside in a different location. Maybe there's a geographical reason for you to have data in a certain location. So you want to be able to have the ability to bring your own storage and put it wherever you like. The third point I'll touch on here is region-specific adherences. So we all know the Essential 8. We all want to make sure that we're complying with those. Obviously, it's more sort of guidelines, gold standard guidelines to follow, not necessarily compliance, but cyber insurance companies will ask if you comply with it. So it sort of has a bit of a looped approach. So in terms of how you can protect your data from a regular backup point, I've got a couple of points here on the screen. We've talked about retention. We're looking at point-in-time restoration, so you want to be able to bring it back to a specific point in time before a breach has occurred. A secured repository. We want to make sure that it's being backed up to a secure environment. Do we trust this third-party provider to house our data, keep it encrypted and prevent people from getting into it? Make sure recovery testing can be done. So I've been on so many calls and conversations with customers. They say, I've had a backup solution. I say, have you tested it? Does it work? I'm not sure. We'll find out. So you want to be able to make sure that you can actually test it and recover to make sure if something does go wrong, you've got a plan. The second 2 points here is more just around access control. So unprivileged users can't actually log in or change any settings, and privileged accounts are unable to delete any data during that retention period. So if you need to retain data for 7 years, even a privileged user can't log in and actually delete that and get rid of it. So you need a solution that ticks all these boxes. So this slide here is something that I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on, but I just wanted to illustrate something here, that protecting your SaaS data that you create. Backups only if you back it up and control access to that platform. That's only one step. So the point I'm trying to illustrate here is how much data loss and downtime can you afford. Now this is probably more relatable to, for example, infrastructure backup, high availability type services. But what this is illustrating is a rough ballpark indication on how long it takes to actually restore. How much downtime do you take from backup? If you do want to scale out into disaster recovery and high availability to reduce that time to operation, reduce your data loss, you can do that. So the point I'm trying to make, backup's not the only answer. You can go that next level if you do need to comply there. So what I'm going to do is, just moving towards the end, just checking on time, just going to cover some best practices for improving data protection. So more on the security side, so preventing people from accessing it that shouldn't be. So enabling multi-factor authentication. Like everyone knows what multi-factor authentication is. Whether you use an app to do it, SMS, whatever it may be, enable multi-factor authentication. And a lot of you in the room probably already complying with a lot of this stuff I've got here, but it's just more of a reminder checklist to make sure you're doing what you can. Enforce password expiration and strength. So every so often we want to change those passwords and have them a certain strength. So, I mean, I went into a bank when I first got our home loan. They asked me to create a password. And they said it can only be 6 characters long, and it needs to be lowercase and at least one number. I'm like, 6 characters long? That's going to take like 10, 15 seconds to brute force your way into. Anyway, what I'm trying to make here is you just want to enforce expiration and also complexity. So length, symbols, characters, capital letters, lowercase, the whole lot. Train your employees. So we see that when humans are, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, but humans are the weakest link, really. Basically, any breach that occurs to either a SaaS-based platform or an on-premise corporate environment has an employee in some way, shape or form. Not directly a result, but close to 80% will have an employee or a human involved in some way, shape or form. So we're sort of circling back again to compliance a little bit. So not only are they cyber insurance companies mandating data protection of your SaaS-based data platforms that you create, they're also mandating cyber awareness training. So training on all different topics, security, compliance, industry specific. So training your employees and having some sort of security awareness training program is very, very, very important. I can't stress it enough. Manage user accounts and lifecycle. So there's been situations where, as an example, somebody leaves the company, their user account has certain privileges, that user account isn't decommissioned properly, still remained, then it's basically another way for someone to get in and access and use those credentials when that person's already left. So user lifecycle, making sure the accounts are all up to date, they have the right amount of privilege and permissions. So adopting the principle of least privilege. So only give users permissions that they need to do their job, nothing more. They have more privileges, it's more risk. So it's all about risk assessment. How much privilege can these users have? Protect all devices. This one's pretty self-explanatory. You've got laptops, phones, whatever it may be, protect those, because it sort of ties into the next point I've got here, sync and share access. So I'm assuming a lot of you will have either like a laptop with like OneDrive sync bar or Google Drive or something, so it allows you to automatically sync your documents. Like I'm definitely not saying don't use it. Just be mindful that if the device isn't protected, something gets on the device, it could be synced into potentially a cloud platform if there is a sync and share ability on the machine. And also plan for disaster. So this one's often forgotten about. So I gave you the example at the start where we say you've got these security tools, have you got backup tools to recover your data if something goes wrong with it? I say, well, I've got it. I hope it works. So you need to be able to have some sort of plan. So if I was to raise a question, if a cyber breach happens, your data gets hacked, do you in your mind, do you know the first steps that you would take? Whether it might not be you, might be a colleague, but do you have a plan, like a plan to recover, just to make sure you can get back up and running as soon as you can? So how to enhance your cyber resilient posture? Well, it all comes down to a layered approach. So basically what I'm getting at with this slide on the screen here is around the outside you've got your main goals: reducing risk, trust, enhancing your resilience, containing disruption. As you sort of move in one layer, you've got categories that relate to specific solutions that you can put in place. So detection response tools, recover, backup tools, investigation, forensics. So as you sort of work your way from outside and in, you want to be able to build a layered approach and not just have sort of like a single point of failure. So the more layers you've got and the more sophisticated your security stack is, the better off you'll be and the more protected you'll be. That's pretty much all I had to cover today. In terms of more information that I've got here, we do have a cloud-to-cloud backup solution brief as a QR on the screen if you want to download that. On your AusCERT conference app as well, there is a couple of downloadables: a OpenText Cybersecurity solution brief, a 2023 threat report that I mentioned earlier, data protection solution brief, and also a 6-part ransomware video series if you want to take a look. So I'll leave that on the screen in case you guys want to grab that QR code. But other than that, I just want to thank you all. Yes?
There's 3 questions.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, sure. No worries. We'll take questions and I'll thank you.
Well, can I first get a big round of applause for Ryan?
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Oh, you got them? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry.
So the first one up is asking if you're providing a copy of the slides. I know that's not necessarily a copy of the slides, but...
That's a good question. We slide copies. Do we provide them? I think we can. Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. No worries at all. That's okay.
I do believe some of the slides get shared with the AusCERT conference team, and they do supply it out through the website as well.
Yeah, easy.
So yeah, we've got some good questions. So Shady's asking, an org of 5,000, 8,000 users moving to SharePoint, and DLP is obviously a challenger. At what point do you think a data governance officer is required?
It is a good question because, as I mentioned before, like our sort of expertise and our organisation. I'll just pop this down. So we generally deal with a lot of sort of like managed service providers and sort of small medium business. So that's sort of generally the kind of companies and customers that we work with and help sort of build their layered posture. So in terms of like an enterprise sort of fired question, I don't think I'd be able to answer that honestly. I can certainly look into it and come back to whoever it is that asked it, but off the top of my head, I don't know. I wouldn't have that answer. Sorry.
This one's a little bit open-ended. Can you speak about data integrity and manipulation? Because I know we're talking a lot about losing backups, but more about just what if the backups are tampered with?
Yeah, so there is a general consensus that, well, not consensus, but like opinions from different industries that I don't need a cloud backup tool. I've got OneDrive as an example. I hear that quite regularly, but the problem with OneDrive, really the biggest, and the integrity part that you mentioned before, is it's not an immutable option. So because things are overridden and changed, it's not something that's immutable. So what you're really looking for, the difference between that and a third-party backup solution, is you're looking at something that's immutable. It can't be changed or edited. It's encrypted. No one can access it, and you can just restore it as it was at that exact point in time. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
What about, in your experience, have you ever gone through data tiering and kind of specified what data, in the event of a large, outage in your business continuity plan, like kind of tiering, like what data you would restore first over other things?
Generally, if it's SaaS based, it really depends on the organisation what data they consider is important to them. It's really going to be a custom type approach based on what data you have in there, what you need operational. For example, you might run maybe an accounting business or something, and you might store all your records in OneDrive or even Google Drive, for example. So if you've got a sync and share tool, for example, on your laptop that you're working along and it's making those copies in the cloud, you might want to restore that first before sort of everything else that you've got in there. So it's really going to come down to what data is important to you.
The catch is we fall in the every department thinks that their data's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So
everything needs to be hot data instead of cold.
Yeah, that's right. So you'll get a line of one person from every department lining up at IT saying, I need my stuff first. So yeah, it's a good point.
Another question is, with cloud backups, obviously being a bit of a larger cost compared to some of the older methods, do you find that companies are more targeting things to back up, or are they still going for general approach of backup everything?
Well, speaking from SaaS-based applications, they're generally backing up everything, because when you look at a third-party cloud-to-cloud backup type tool, what you're really doing is you're, first of all, getting permissions and connecting it into either a cloud-based environment, either 365 or Google Workspace. After that, realistically, all you're doing is checking everything and just hitting go. So it's really going to come down to, for example, I guess you realistically and best case practice would be to back up like everything, but it's really going to come down to what you need to back up, how long does it need to be retained for, and the costs of the third-party provider to provide that to you. So it's going to come down to a couple of things.
So we only have a little bit more time left, but there's 3 more questions.
Yeah.
And lots coming through.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we'll try to rapid fire through them.
Yeah, no worries.
Very important. How often do I test my backups?
I mean, how long's a piece of string? I mean, I'd probably look at. Geez, I don't even know how to answer that. Like me personally, if I was responsible for the backup solutions of either a small, medium business, SME, or enterprise, I'd be looking at testing it with this current climate, considering how much that accelerated threat landscape has changed. I'd probably be looking to, and I know it's time, right? You need to schedule time to be able to do this. I'd probably look at doing it as a minimum, probably monthly, like once a month. Just test it, even with like a subset of. It doesn't need to be everything. Don't need to restore everything, but just probably do it either once a month, potentially even once every 2 months, just to make sure it's still operational. Especially if the solution that you're using to back up and protect your data gets updated quite regularly. So you want to make sure that it still works after an update goes through.
Got another one here, which is how much you rely on DLP as a control?
So as in us personally, we don't rely on it sort of as much. We generally see it more on the email threat protection side mostly, just making sure that, for example, credit card details and things aren't being passed through email. So we generally see it more on the email side and less on the backup space.
And one last question, which is how do you deal with the issue of customers requesting their personal information to be deleted from your organization when you have immutable backups?
Sorry, say that again.
So customers requesting to have their data deleted.
Yep.
How are you dealing with that when your backups are immutable?
So in terms of the backups that are immutable, it just means we can't change them, so we can't edit them or anything like that. If a customer wants their data erased and removed, we can obviously delete that and purge it. So we don't have access to it to go in and tamper with it and access it and restore it and things like that. But if there is a request to have it deleted and removed, then by all means that it can be done, yes.
Awesome, that's everything we have. Get another huge round of applause for Ryan.
All right. Thanks, guys. Now I can relax for the rest of the afternoon. But if you have any other questions, feel free to approach me. They're outside in the booth. We're on just inside in G2 OpenText. So thanks all for your attention and time.